this is the agenda for today. So we'll look at the course overview from a very high level, and we'll see some benefits and the highlights of what we are going to cover in the course. And then we'll move into the subject basic, like why BW6, why you need to learn, what is the edge that it is going to give you over others, and some brief specific points we'll take up regarding BW6. And if you have any questions, any doubts, please feel free to stop and ask. Okay. So after BW6 is covered, we'll move on to container edition. So just to clarify, so this session that I take, those are a combined session consisting of BW6 and BWCE. So I refer to the version 6.5.1 in my course and CE 2.4.5. So basically, the reason for taking up a combined course is that the design time for BW6 and BWCE are more or less similar. So it doesn't make any sense to have two separate courses for that. Basically, these two differ in terms of their deployment. So once we are done with the development part, we will move on to the separate deployment courses, and we'll look at each the deployment processes for BW6 and CE separately. So that makes it a combined classes. So we usually have 30 hours of online classes, which may increase a bit due to some reasons. Means if you have any more clarifications, if some topics remain uncovered. So 30 hours is more or less the timeline, but that's not hardbound. And as I said, it covers both BW6 and CE. So we'll start from the very basic of the core concept of BW6, and we'll cover the entire life cycle. So all the courses I conduct, those are more of a hands-on perspective than from a theoretical perspective. So you will learn the hands-on, and along with that, you will learn the theory. So I try to make it interactive so that it's easier for you to understand. And this course, since we start from the very basic, so it's not mandatory, but it's good to have if you have any prior TIBCO experience. But that's not mandatory, because in my courses there have been people who have been from non-TIBCO background, and they have also proceeded well with the course. So that is not a prerequisite. So we will be covering the core concepts first, and then we will move on to the more advanced concepts. But all of this will be hands-on based. So I'll be sharing the slides at the end of the sessions so that you can refer to them. And if you have any questions, you can get back to me at a later point of time. Also, these sessions, these are basically, as I said, of an interactive mode. So if you have any questions, like suppose I still have communication with students who were in my past. So till date, I've completed 4 batches successfully. And I still have communication with people who were in the first batch itself. So even after the course ends, if you have any doubts or any reason for collaborating, then you can get back to me on my email, and I'll take my time out to reply. So this will be an interactive session and not limited to only this 30 hours of online. Okay. So, and yeah, at the end of the course, I'll be giving out a sample of the latest BW6 and CE certification materials, some of which I use for my own certification. So that will be at the end of the course. Okay. So before I move on to the subject, so any questions till now?
Abhishek, Prasad here.
Yeah.
Abhishek, can you cover Docker or BWCE container edition? Cover Docker and the Foundry cloud, no? PCL.
Your voice is not clear. Can you repeat once more, please?
You will cover Docker also in these deployments.
I didn't get it. Can you just ping?
Docker. I'm asking you will go for cover Docker.
Oh yeah, obviously. So just to clarify this for everyone. So for BW6, which is basically an on-premise deployment, for BW6 we will be looking at the modes of deployment in TEA. And after BW6, when we move on to the BWCE deployment, we will be covering Docker as our primary cloud transformation technology. And then we will be covering one particular cloud platform. Preferably, I cover AWS. So we'll see how to deploy our BWCE codes, which have been Docker in the Dockerized container form in AWS. So we'll cover not the entire Docker, only the relevant portions which are required for the BWCE deployment, and also the relevant portions which is required for the deployment of this Dockerized BWCE container into AWS. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions more?
Are we covering these courses parallelly at BW6 and CE or one by one?
Okay, so this is a combined course. So as I said, the development part for BW6 and CE are exactly similar. Okay, so the studio, if you'll see, that version is also same for the compatible BWCE and 6 versions. So the development part we will cover, that will be a single development course. So if you're using BWCE and if you're using BW6, the development part will apply similarly to both. So once we are done with the development, we will move on to the deployment part. And for the deployment, we will take it up separately. So first we'll take BW6 and we'll see what are the and how are the modes of the on-premise deployment. And then we will move on to the BWCE and we'll see the Dockerized container form of container creation and then AWS deployment.
You mean to say you are covering one by one, not parallel, right? But
development will be same. There will be nothing. Development part is the same for BW6 and C. For the one by one part, that will come only on the deployment.
And, are we covering deployment part in TEA?
Yes, for BW6, we'll be covering the TA deployment, both from the console as well as from the command line. And for the BWCE, we'll be covering the Docker and deployment to AWS.
Are we covering script deployments?
Yes, script deployments for T, we will do that. So, and also for the AWS also, we'll see what are the modes of script deployment and what are the modes of GUI deployment.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, I just got one question in the chat asking for my background. So just it will be a repeat for some of you. So just give me a moment. Yeah. So basically, I have been more than 10 years in the industry, and I've worked on a lot of BW6, BW stack of TIBCO stack of products. So along with that, I worked on the cloud stack for BW for TIBCO, integration of TIBCO with the TIBCO cloud or the Docker and OpenShift, and recently I got TIBCO certified in BW6. Okay, so any questions regarding that? Okay, so I'll move on to the subject now. Okay, so first coming to the background, why BW6 is necessary. So I assume some of you may have worked in BW6, but I assume zero familiarity, and I'll be starting from scratch. Okay. Okay. So now coming to the objective for learning BW6 and for that matter BWC. So sometime back in around 2013, 2014, or previously to that, the main and preferred mode of deployment for integration customers was on-premise. So all their deployments, like we know in BW5, all the deployments were done in the TIBCO administrator and the administrator server setup. that was done on the client premises only. So they would have elaborate structures and server setup for the TIBCO admin deployment. So slowly, a trend emerged where the client, instead of wanting to use its own infrastructure and exhaust it in case they have a huge TIBCO applications load, instead of exhausting their own resources, some of the clients, there was a trend shift in the industry whereby some of those non mission critical applications got deployed in the cloud servers. So the utility of that was that they would get a high reliability and have high availability and scalability on demand without exhausting their own resources. So as the initial trend emerged, some of those, as I said, mission non-critical applications, they got deployed on cloud, but most of the applications still were on the client premises only. So it created a sort of hybrid model where some of the client applications were deployed in their own premise, some in the cloud. So in that scenario, TIBCO came up with this BW6 product. On one hand, this BW6 was upgradation on terms of BW5. The integration capabilities were similar to that of BW5, but on the deployment perspective, it offered a lot more scope. So initially, TIBCO maintained these two versions, like BW6 and another was BWCE, the container edition. So initially, the main idea behind this was that clients were still more inclined towards deploying on the on-premise, that is on the traditional mode of deployment, rather than going full out on the cloud form of deployment. So initially, this BW6 and C, they were two entirely different products used to operate in a different way. And C was targeted only for clients looking to migrate their applications to cloud, while the BW6 stack of product that help the client to upgrade their codes from BW5 to BW6 with some more ease of integration and some more ease of development on the on-premise in the on-premise architecture only. So another main shift that BW6 introduced was the shift from the TIBCO's native structure to the industry standard Eclipse structure. So initially, what the design as we know is a TIBCO native product. So it's not a standardized industry product. So that is why most of the Java features or most of the basic features for which are available for Eclipse, those were not available. So in a way, this BW6 has BW5 has a lot of constraints when it comes to integration with other partner products. Like for example, if you want to collaborate with say AS400, that's an old form of legacy form of database. So for that, you would if you want to do that in BW5, you will need a plugin to be supplied by TIBCO. Okay. And suppose for some other databases, you want to integrate that with BW5, but TIBCO hasn't released a plugin yet. So the client would be stuck, and they would have to either go for customized solution, or they would have to use some form of Java coding to a certain extent, and that too would be limited to integrate that, or that may not be entirely possible. So the best way would be to have the plugins, but that places a constraint on the client's development perspectives. Now with BW6 being on the Eclipse platform, which is an industry standard, and Java being a native there, so the client has got a lot of more flexibility in terms of integrating with these other applications. So Now, if suppose if you want to integrate your code on BW6 with say MongoDB, if I consider for a moment that TIBCO has not released a plugin for that specifically, you can always go ahead, use their code, embed that, and develop your own Java code for the connection string in BW6, and you can do the connection for your code, but not so in BW5. So there comes this the idea behind this shift from moving to from a TIBCO native structure to a more industry standardized Eclipse structure, which offers means the integration capabilities may be the same between BW5 and 6, but the development capabilities may be the same, but the integration capabilities with other partner products that enhances a great deal with BW6. And as I said, initially TIBCO introduced these two products, with one being aimed at the on-premise clients and one aimed for clients who are looking to move their applications to cloud. So slowly, as we have the progression of versions, we gradually see a sort of merge of the features which are offered in BW6 and BWCE. So like with the 6.5 versions and above for BW6 and 2.4.5 versions and above for BWCE, what we see is that the studio offered has become the same. The same capabilities as far as the development perspective are concerned. The same capabilities are offered both for BW6 Studio as well as the BWCE Studio. So in a way, TIBCO is looking to merge these two products going down the line. And this is because as from 2014 onwards, as the trend continues till today, so now the cloud deployment has become a preferred mode of deployment. That's not a niche anymore. So more and more clients are coming up with their option to move their codes directly in the cloud rather than having an elaborate structure set up on their own premises. So as clients tend to move more into the cloud segment, BWCE becomes more relevant. So, but still they have some clients, actually a lot of clients who actually have some of the mission critical applications still deployed on the on-premise. So for that, the BW6 is still necessary. But going down the line somewhere, TIBCO is looking at merging these two products to have a single combined product, which will have the capability both for the on-premise deployment as well as the cloud deployment. Okay, so that was a basic of what led to the BW6 development. Now, as you can see in this slide, so these are basically the features which are offered by this product. So on-premise deployment, as I said, that is done by BW6. For the cloud deployment and the PaaS deployment or integration platform as a service, we have this BWC deployment, BWC capability. So for this cloud deployment on public or private cloud like AWS or Azure, we use Docker for generating the container to be deployed on those clouds. For this iPaaS, that is the integration platform as a service, TIBCO has its own TIBCO cloud platform where you do not need to go via the Docker route. You can directly push your code from the studio. If you have an account in TIBCO cloud, you can push your application directly from your studio to the TIBCO cloud account. So that is an iPaaS offering from TIBCO itself. And once you have this application on cloud, you can use integrate that application with Mashery also to act as your API manager. Okay, so these are some of the features that we just covered. So just to touch on a few points. BW6, as I said, is based on the Eclipse platform, so it makes development much easier for people who are conversant in the Eclipse environment, as well as easier to create their own Java code. So in BW5, we had a limitation like we could use only an limited amount of Java code, or if we have a Java code, we have to use that in particular Java activities, but not here. You can in BW6, within the code itself, if you make it Java compliant, then you can create your own source, your own classes, and you can use them directly in your project. So this flexibility offered in terms of Java, because Java is a native for BW6 for the Eclipse. So that capability is much more enhanced in BW6 compared to the BW5 offerings. And also one very, very important aspect of this is the integration of the REST APIs. So for BW5, so I keep repeating this BW5 because some of you may have worked in BW5, and BW5 was the flagship product of TIBCO that got them into the integration market. So for BW5, for using REST, which is a preferred mode of API management and communication for the web services, particularly for this cloud setup. For that, it's not natively supported in TIBCO BW5. When I say not natively supported, I mean that the SOAP, which is the other protocol, that is a native. That is, you do not need any other plugin rather than the standard set of palettes to use that. But for using REST in BW5, it takes a lot of pain because you have to have the correct version of the REST plugin, and you have to have there are a lot of complex activities that you need to use to perform a simple function. But with BW6, REST is inbuilt. So that means with a few clicks and without needing any plugins, you can be cloud ready. You can create your own REST service. Or even a better approach is, in actual, if you consider the actual development scenario, so you have a large team where the UI may be working on a different technology, the integration team is working on TIBCO. So usually what happens is that teams develop a generic REST API based on the Swagger model. So once they have that Swagger spec, which is equally applicable to the Java people, which is equally applicable to the .NET people, and the same thing you can use in the TIBCO BW6 or CE as well. So you just have to import that Java spec in your code, and with a few clicks you can create your own REST services, and you can do the actual implementation. So the framework for communication that is created in open source, and that can be integrated in TIBCO. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to create your own communication API specs and share it to the other team. There can be a generic specification that can be created, and that same thing can be used by the UI team to communicate to you, and the same thing you can incorporate on your site, on the TIBCO site, to accept the request from the UI team and respond back. So that framework, that the generic form is also accepted in TIBCO. So that makes life much easier to work with REST API. And since for the cloud, we will be mostly dealing with REST API, so this is a very useful feature to have in BW6 and particularly BWCE. And the other important thing is the OSJ components. So OSJ basically is the are sort of Java bundles. So just to give a brief idea, so these palettes, like if you have worked in BW5, you will know that we have a lot of palettes and a lot of palette groups. So when you create an EAR, which is basically the archive for the deployment, all the palette support that we have for the entire set of palette support for BW5, that is incorporated in your EAR, irrespective of the fact that either whether you have used that particular palette or the palette group or not. So suppose if I have an EAR built in BW5 which does not use any EMS features. Even then, in the EAR that you create, you will have references of that EAR of that EMS supportability. So that means unnecessarily your EAR is consuming more memory, is heavier. With BW6, with this OSGI component, the plus point is that all the palettes which we get as a standard in BW6 and C, those come in the form of OSGI bundles. And based on the activities or palettes that you have used in your project, when you create the EAR, only those related OSGI bundles are grouped together to form the EAR. That means if you have not used the EMS functionality in your project, when you create the EAR, it will not have an EMS OSGI bundle plugged into your EAR. It will have only those project OSGI bundles for the palettes you have used in your project. So that decreases the memory footprint of your EAR, and that application that you generate in the Dockerized format, that is also lighter, and that is one of the prerequisites of creation of microservices or of our cloud deployment. So using OSGI bundles, TIBCO has achieved this feature whereby it can make on demand, it can make its EAR lighter and more compatible for the cloud deployment. Along with that, OSGI offers some monitoring functionalities, but that we will see when we move on to the actual TIBCO administrator platform. That is the TEA. Okay. Okay, so these are some of the points we already covered. Okay, so one other thing is the profile usage. So I'll just like to mention this. So profile basically is or properties basically is you can relate that to the global. So properties are for people to consider different types. Global variables say that the global level, that is, once you say the global variable is applicable for all the projects, means all the processes which are deployed in the project. But with BW6, we have a certain hierarchy. So when you define the project properties, then you have basically three hierarchy of these properties. So one is the application properties, one is the project property, and one is the process property. So when you define a project property, that is a property which is defined on the project level. To use that in the process, you have to relate that with the process property. So that means, suppose you have two global variables A and B, and when you use and two processes A and B. So when you use the global variable A in process A, you have to create a process variable A as well, and relate the global variable, the project property with this process property. So this hierarchy is brought into the concept just to maintain this hierarchy for the purpose of deployment. So when you deploy, so suppose we are deploying in PE. Okay. So we have some project specific properties set up, and we have multiple instances like app nodes and app spaces we have. So we may deploy one EAR in multiple app nodes. So at the app node level also, we can change these global variable these property values. So there, we have to promote a project. So we'll see this in more detail when we move to the action sessions. Okay. Any questions till now? So the screenshot I have here is the execution screen, that is the visual debugger for BW6. So just to explain this a bit, So, sorry. Yeah. So this is where we get the jobs, whatever is running, and this shows you a real-time view of how your process is progressing. So just like in BW5, and you have the data, whatever for the pallets which are being executed, you have the data and the breakpoints, all those available here. And this one is very interesting. So this basically is a feature for BW6 which allows you to connect to the BW agents which are running in your local network, and you can directly connect to that, and from your studio itself you can deploy in your local environment, or if you have an environment setup which is part of your network, you can deploy there also. So this screen, this actually whatever it's showing here, these are actually applications deployed on a particular app spaces and app nodes. So this feature is offered by BW6 as well. Okay, so now a few specific features. So as I said, this REST is inbuilt in TIBCO. So this is a mode of implementation of SOAP service and REST service. So SOAP, so here we have a distinction between a stateful and a stateless form of operation. So stateful basically means that a state is maintained. Like suppose if I take a very simple example. So if you are doing a banking transaction, once you log in, for the next, suppose you first log in, then you check your EMI details, and then you do some debit from your account. So once you log in using the first SOAP, suppose your banking application exposes SOAP service. So once you log in using the login SOAP service, the next time when if it is a part of a related transaction, that is the session is continued, and you perform the EMI check, and then you do a debit, you don't have to enter your login credentials or your entity details like account number, everything, each time you do a separate request. So that is a continuous session. So the banking application knows who you are. So suppose you are debiting rupees 100, then the banking application ensures that it is debited from your account and not my account, and vice versa. So a state is maintained on the banking application side in case of a SOAP service. And for a REST, which is basically stateless, you don't have that feature. So that means for if your banking application on the other hand exposes REST services, so for each transaction that you do, you will have to provide your entire set of data each time you do a separate transaction. Like for the EMI check, you have to provide your entire set of data, which is consisting of your credentials and other relevant details. For the debit, you again have to provide your credentials and your relevant data. So there is no state maintained on the banking side. So this maintenance of state is done using a concept of conversations. So this is just a pictorial representation of that, but we will when we go to the course, we will see actually how this conversation works, and this is a very important portion of our course. So this conversation is used to maintain the state, and for the REST services, we don't have this conversation. So we will see what this conversation topic actually implies and how to implement that. Okay, so coming to this deployment, so this is for BW6, and as I said, we have deployment in on-premise only currently for BW6. So there are two ways for that. One would be the scripted command line feature, and one would be using the GUI, that is the TA. So we'll cover both in our course. Okay. And this is an architecture representation of the on-premise deployment for TEA. So here you can see both from the command line and from the web GUI, you can access the TA server, which basically accesses the BW agent. This is something which will be running in each of the machines which are part of your domain. And using that BW agent, and either or using the BW admin command, you can deploy your applications in the app nodes, in the app spaces basically, which consists of a number of app nodes. So if you see, this is a domain N1, which is limited to a single machine A, and that domain N1 has one app space which has two app nodes. But this domain can be can span several machines also. So in this other domain, the M1, you have the domain spanning two machines, and it has two app spaces. So basically, the app space S1 is limited to machine A, but the app space S2 is spanning two machines, that is A and B. So in this app space A2, we have app node A on machine A and the other app nodes on machine B. So this is a form of distributed architecture that we can perform in the TA on-premise environment, and this is something that we'll also look at when we go to the actual deployment portion. Okay, so this is a comparison of BW5 and 6. So we already covered this. Okay, now I move on to the BWCE. So BWCE is cloud native. So as I said, this is used mainly for clients looking to migrate to the container version or to deploy on clouds. So as we just discussed, so mostly the development is the same, but for the deployment perspective, it differs for BW6 and C. So I'll tell you exactly where it differs. So for BW6, so as I said, that's the same. That means that when you create a project, you have something called a deployment target. So it was not there in BW6 before the 6.5 version, and BWCE before the 2.4.5, I think, or 4.2 version. So initially, what we had in BW6 was, when you create the project, it will give you only one target for deployment, that is the TA. And BWCE, it would give you only one target for deployment, that is the cloud. But with this newer version of BW6 and BWCE, we have this deployment target concept. So suppose you create a project in BW6 Studio, you have a at the project level, when you right click, you have an option of the deployment target. There you can choose to either this on-premise as your deployment target, or you can choose a cloud platform as a deployment target. So both are available for BW6 Studio. And the exact same thing is available for BWCE Studio as well. So suppose in BWCE you create a project. Now after the project creation, you can change the deployment target to point to make it compatible to the on-premise deployment. Okay, so that is possible. In the same thing is possible for BW6 Studio and BWCE Studio. Now, suppose you are creating a project in BW6 and you have chosen the deployment target as container. Okay. The catch is that since, as I said, TIBCO is still maintaining these two separate versions. They have not combined the two. The catch is that for BW6 project, which you have now created, now changed the deployment target to point to a container, you will have to open, create the, take a zip of that project, export that project, and import that project in our BWCE Studio, and then you can build the corresponding Dockerized format. This is so because we have something called a build file. So this particular build file. See, this is the one I'm talking about. This is the deployment target pop-up, which is same for BW6 and C. And you see this, it has these six boxes. So either you can create your project in one of the studios, and you can choose any one or multiple of these deployment targets. So based on that, your project is your project deployment option is changed. Okay. So this build pack for the Docker or Cloud Foundry. So basically, TIBCO supports two platforms for container creation. So just to keep in perspective, containers are basically not an application, but you can consider this as a mini environment which has your application and all the dependencies needed for running that application. So the cloud platforms like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, these basically, these applications are not, these platforms are technology irrelevant. That means they are not concerned with the technology with which you have created your product. They are concerned only with containers. So they know how to run containers and how to maintain them, but they are not concerned with the underlying technology. So to deploy on cloud platform, you first need to create a container out of your application, and BWCE supports this Docker and Cloud Foundry as the technologies for conversion of your code of your project or of your application into a container. But for doing that, they also have introduced a build pack. This is basically a build pack you can think of as a bridge, which is basically incorporated and which helps to transfer your application into a container for that particular technology, that is for Docker or for Cloud Foundry. So basically TIBCO has two build packs, one for Docker, one for Cloud Foundry. But the catch is that this build pack is available only for BWC, not for BW6. So in essence, what that means is that even though BW6 offers you the opportunity to create your project and change the deployment target to point to a cloud, you still won't be able to create a container out of that unless and until you have a license for BWCE and you export your project from BW6 Studio, re-import that in your BWCE Studio, and use this build pack for converting that into a Dockerized form of container. Okay, so in this way, TIBCO is still maintaining two separate stack of products, but going down the line, it's their vision to someday merge these two products to have a combined project, a product which has this combined ability to either deploy on-premise or deploy on cloud. So similarly, if you are using BWC and you want to deploy on on the on-premise, you will have to do a similar thing. That is, you will have to export your project from your BWC Studio, import in the BW6 Studio, and then create the EAR and deploy on-premise. Okay. Okay. So coming to this cloud deployment portion. So as I said, the containerization technology that is supported is a Docker and Cloud Foundry. So for TIBCO cloud deployment, you do not need any containerization technology. You can directly push it from your studio to the cloud if you have an account. For pushing to the actual private and public clouds, which are more popular, you need this containerization as a middle point, and there you have these two technologies which we are dependent on. So once you convert your application into a container using either of these two technologies, you are good to deploy that on any of the cloud platforms.